My camera off just in case.
Good morning, everyone. Are we starting? I think we're starting. I'm going to assume we're starting. And welcome to our very first webinar in our Economic Mobility Learning Series. We're so glad you're here with us. Hopefully you've got a good cup of coffee or tea in hand, maybe even a morning scone. It's Friday after all. And more importantly, we're glad you're making the time to pause, learn, and reflect with us. We hope you'll really dial in, set aside the multitasking if you can, and come ready with your questions. Before we dive in, I want to briefly ground us in the Greater Houston Community Foundation, why economic mobility has become central to our work, and how this series fits into something bigger that's building in Houston right now. The Community Foundation exists to inspire and create meaningful and positive change with our donors and for our community. We call ourselves Houston's philanthropic partner because that's exactly what we do. We work alongside individuals, families, businesses, advisors, foundations, and nonprofits to direct generosity where it can do the most good. Over the last 30 years, our donors and partners have collectively given more than $3 billion to nonprofit organizations that improve lives and strengthen communities. But our role extends beyond grant making. By leveraging data, trusted relationships with incredible partners, and our ability to convene, we help turn generosity into sustained progress. I have the privilege of working with a fabulous team and leading the Community Foundation's community impact work, comprised of 3 core initiatives. First, Understanding Houston, our regional indicator platform launched in partnership with Rice University's Kinder Institute for Urban Research, that roots us all incredible data about where Houston is thriving and where we're falling short. We hope you all visit understandinghouston.org. Second, Greater Houston Disaster Alliance, where we partner with United Way of Greater Houston to improve our region's disaster response to recovery and resilience. And third, and the most relevant to today's program, our high impact grant making initiative, which makes it easier for our donors and other partners to invest together in the most promising solutions to Houston's pressing challenges with a focus on economic mobility. Houston is a city of opportunity, but for too many families and children, that opportunity remains out of reach. Only half of children in the US will earn more than their parents, and here in Harris County, nearly 1 in 4 children lives in poverty. Last year, Houston made headlines as the most impoverished major city in the US. Research shows how poverty persists across generations. 1 in 3 children who grow up in poverty will remain there as an adult. That reality has real implications for children and families' lives, but also for Houston's future workforce, economic growth, and long-term stability. The challenges facing low-income families in Houston are complex and persistent. They demand a response that is equally serious, coordinated, and sustained. And that brings me to why we're all here this morning. Last fall, Houston leaders from across sectors came together for an inaugural Economic Mobility Summit. The energy in that room sparked something. Community partners leaning in together on one of the biggest challenges of our time. Why is it so hard for so many people in our region to get ahead? And what can we actually do about it? Those conversations led us as co-conveners to explore the potential of establishing a Houston Economic Mobility Coalition, a cross-sector effort committed to advancing economic mobility at scale. And as we do that work, we know that we can't build in a vacuum. One of the clearest things we heard from summit participants was this: we want to keep learning. People wanted to know what's working in other cities. What lessons and solutions might we draw on to inform what we build together? This series is our answer to that call. Through it, we'll hear from leaders in other communities who have built and tested approaches to improving economic mobility. Not to copy and paste, because that's not really a thing, but to help us learn faster and be smarter as Houston writes its own story. And there is no better place to start than a good old rival city, Dallas, Texas. So today we're joined by Alan Cohen, founder and CEO of the Child Poverty Action Lab, or CPAL. CPAL serves as an unofficial R&D engine for Dallas, rethinking how data and human-centered design is used across public systems, community programs, and neighborhoods to break cycles of intergenerational poverty. Alan has an incredible career at the intersection of childhood, place, and poverty, from leading early childhood efforts in Dallas ISD to building statewide partnerships in Washington State. He's also a senior fellow at Harvard's Ed Redesign Lab, supporting cross-sector work in cities across the country. We're genuinely honored to have him help kick off the series. And after his presentation, we'll open it up for Q&A. Feel free to send in your questions along the way. That'll help us tee them up for Alan. And then we'll actually have a Mentimeter poll. So yeah, there's going to be a pop quiz at the end. No, I'm just joking. But we do want your reactions and your input. It will help shape the coalition's thinking and direction. So we hope you'll join us in doing that. Alan, thank you so much for being here. I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Let me just pull up some slides. Um, Look, it's really great to be with everyone this morning. Couldn't be more excited. First, I just want to thank Diana, and I want to thank the Greater Houston Community Foundation for having me. I heard about that recent Economic Mobility Summit that you had with Raj Shetty, which is so cool. And I'm genuinely excited that there is this movement building in cities across Texas to think about how our systems interact with neighborhood conditions and shape opportunity for kids. I genuinely think every city in America is always in a state of conversation about the social contract. And I think it's really, really good and positive when kids are at the center of that conversation. So today, what I get to do is spend a few minutes telling you about how we got the Child Poverty Action Lab up and running in Dallas and some of the approaches we've taken over the years. And so CPAL is an initiative that we launched in Dallas back in 2018 to answer the question, is it possible for a city like Dallas, a big Texas city, to work strategically enough and collaboratively enough to reduce child poverty by 50% within a single generation or just a couple of decades? I thought I'd just take a couple moments right up top to tell you a little bit more about me and why I wanted to be a part of this effort. As Diana mentioned, about 15 years ago, I dedicated my career to public education. And specifically, I was focused on strengthening early childhood systems here in Dallas and then in other parts of the country. And through those experiences, I came to the conclusion that we could ask the question, do we have so much poverty in cities across America because of failings in our schools? Or does it just appear that our schools are failing because we have so much poverty? And clearly the answer is yes, right? And the more that you actually think about that, the more you start to realize that issues like housing and healthcare and safety and even local job markets in the economy, they're really deeply entwined. And so if we have aspirations to see literally tens of thousands of children currently living in conditions of poverty, to see these kids achieve upward mobility at scale in a matter of just a couple of decades, it's going to require an approach that engages all of our systems, all at the same time, to attack the problem from multiple angles all at once. Right. So that's the approach that we decided to take in launching CPAL. And the way that we action that was by integrating data, evidence, and talent across a range of issues that we refer to as our 5 big bets for economic mobility. This is benefits delivery, infant maternal health, housing, criminal justice safety, with a real focus on neighborhoods, early development, and economic connectedness. And these are all issues that intersect in meaningful ways with the places children grow up. And they often intersect very directly in the lives of children and families struggling with poverty. But the reason we focus on these 5 big bets specifically is that they met 2 very specific criteria. First, there is a really strong causal evidence base, longitudinal research that suggests that they influence experiences in childhood in ways that are going to influence economics in adulthood. So that's a really important link, right? The evidence suggests that these issues intersect in kids' lives in ways that influence their experiences in childhood in ways that are going to impact their economics in adulthood. The second is that these are all issues where we can really move the needle. We can make a huge difference just with the resources and rulemaking that we have right in our local community. Okay. So imagine a world, right? Imagine that like the federal government is not going to come and save the day with policy. Okay. Can you imagine a world where the federal government is not going to come and save the day with policy? Okay. Okay. Now, and imagine a world where Texas is not going to come and just save the day with policy. So just take a minute to try to imagine this hypothetical world, right? What's really, really great is that we can still make an enormous impact by focusing on what is actually within our control and with the resources we already have. But when we take that kind of approach, when we're not going to focus as much on policy at the state and federal level, it means that success for a problem like poverty or economic mobility is going to require a really strong integrated working relationship with local government. And that's the second reason I really wanted to be a part of CPAL was that we had a mayor in Dallas that decided to make child poverty and economic mobility a priority. And he's the one that asked me to think about starting this organization. And when he did, he made a deal with me. He said that if I'd start an organization that was going to use data, but not use data to admire the problem, okay, that we were going to use data to try to drive action and drive others to action, that he'd be willing to use his convening power as mayor to, for the first time in Dallas's history, bring together all of the administrative CEOs of all of our local public agencies. So it was literally the first time in Dallas's history that in a structured way, in the same room, we had the mayor, the county executive, but also the city manager, the head of our housing authority, the superintendent of schools, the head of our safety net hospital system, our district attorney, our police chief, the chancellor of our community college, the head of the transportation department, all getting together in the same room. And the truth is, like, that got really interesting for me. Because if the mayor had come to me and said, you know, I want to focus on child poverty, and what I'd like to do is let's go to philanthropy, right? And let's ask them if they'd give us a little bit of money so we can start a couple programs and it'll be really good for kids. I would have said, that sounds great, Mr. Mayor. And I would have said that because he's the mayor. But I would have said, thanks, but no thanks. And the reason is that in Dallas at the time, we're having the headlines in 2018 that you're having right now in Houston, right? We were seeing in our news that Dallas had the highest rate of child poverty among any big city, cities over 1 million in population anywhere in the country, and that 1 out of every 3 kids in our city was growing up below the federal poverty line. That is an issue of scale, okay? That is an issue of magnitude, and that means that we're going to have to attack that issue with resources of scale. And just for perspective, right? Um, every year, our government spends about more than $1 trillion just on the social safety net. Okay, all of philanthropy across the country spends about $50 billion. Okay, what that means is if we could just make government about 10% more effective, we'd effectively double all philanthropy in the country. And I have yet to meet anyone in the state of Texas, regardless of ideology, that doesn't believe we have at least 10% room for improvement in government. And so that's kind of like what we focus on at CPAL. We put data and evidence at the center of a conversation with all these leaders who collectively control $10 billion plus in annual operating budget, right? And we essentially, kind of like what Diana was saying, we've become almost like the unofficial research and development department that none of these agencies can actually have in earnest because in government, there's too much red tape, there's too many politics. So it's really hard to truly have a disruption unit that can operate with the kind of independence that innovation work really, really requires on an ongoing basis. Now, how does that actually like work in practice? So I think the best way to describe the way CPAL operates is with one of my favorite quotes, right? Have a bias towards action, right? We want to see something happen now. You can break that big plan into small steps and take the first step right away. This really speaks to me because in Dallas, I don't know if it's like this in Houston, but in Dallas, we have a fetish for strategic plans. I mean, we have a graveyard. We have so many strategic plans that operate like paperweights at this point. And so, we want to make sure that, as much as I love a good strategic plan, I want to make sure that that actually translates into impact. And so, what we do is we integrate data and evidence into every one of our issues. So, whether it's affordable housing or healthcare, what we're doing is we're taking big problems and big strategies. We're using data and insight to break those problems into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, and then we're feeling like we have permission to take action on one piece at a time and keep going until we see big outcomes move. So here's a couple initiatives just to truly dive into what it looks like. Our very, very first initiative in 2018 was to get this group focused on the Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Program, or WIC. I think most folks on this webinar are going to be familiar with the WIC program, but just in case, like WIC is kind of like food stamps, except it's only for very high nutrition items in the grocery store. And it is only available to pregnant women and families with low-income families with children 0 to 5 years old, right? And we have decades upon decades now of longitudinal research that shows that folks that are participating in WIC improve their cognitive development, their behavioral development, their physical development. This has had over 50 years of extremely strong bipartisan support. It maintains strong bipartisan support today, which is not an easy thing to do nationally. And despite all of the evidence and all of the support, in Dallas at this time, only 4 out of every 10 eligible participants, only 40% of the families eligible for WIC in Dallas County were actually accessing the benefit. What that functionally means is that we were leaving about $50 million a year that was already federally appropriated, dollars that had already passed through all the politics and were already available to us. We were leaving $50 million a year in DC. Okay. So just as perspective, right? If Melinda Gates just once, who's a Dallas native, right? If Melinda Gates just once flew from her current home in Seattle, right, to her like childhood home in Dallas, right, and just once said, "I'm going to write a $50 million check once," if folks in Dallas will focus on connecting hungry families with sustenance, it would be front page news in our paper. Every philanthropic foundation in the city would be scrambling to be a part of it. Every nonprofit in the city would be trying to figure out how they could get in on it. And what I want you to understand is the check is written. It's written every single year. And all we got to do is connect the dots. All we got to do is connect the resources with the need. So what we ended up doing was this was when CPAL was a mighty staff of three. Okay. This was our first map that we ever created as our first neighborhood map. And what you're seeing on this map is where it's bright red. That's where we have the highest numbers and the highest concentration in neighborhoods of families that are eligible for WIC benefits. Okay. And then what you're seeing are these dots. And the dots are where we actually had WIC clinics that families have to go to 4 times a year in Texas to sign up and renew their benefits with WIC. Does anyone see like a little bit of a mismatch or anything? Like I was showing this to business leaders when CPAL was starting, and you get that like that ooh kind of like thing. Like, so here's the cool thing. Okay, we brought this map to the administrator at City Hall that is in charge of the WIC program for our region. Okay. Now, when you do this, when you bring data to help and I always say this, right? Like I'm a recovering bureaucrat. I love bureaucrats. I think if you really want to have impact in this world, the number one thing you can do is adopt a bureaucrat, right? So like when you bring this type of data, right, to somebody that is working in the belly of the beast, you're going to get one of two reactions. One of those reactions might be, uh, don't show this to anybody. They're going to think we don't know what we're doing. That's a bad reaction. We don't like that. That's like CMA kind of a reaction. Okay. What we really liked is the reaction we got, which is, this is great. I didn't know, I haven't seen data like this before. We can do something about this. And immediately she used her rulemaking authority to stop auto-renewing leases on where the clinics were focused so that we could make intentional decisions every time a lease came up as to where we were going to put WIC clinics to try to optimize it. But let's just say we optimize these 15 clinic sites to reach the most families. We don't think we're going to go from 40% participation to 80, 90% participation. To do that, we need to roll up our sleeves and actually understand what is going on. Why are there so many families not accessing these resources? And so that's what we do. We wanted to talk to 40 moms that were participating in the WIC program. We wanted to talk to 40 moms that were eligible but not participating in the WIC program. We wanted to talk to folks that were frontline workers in our WIC clinics. We wanted to talk to folks that were central administrators at the city that were operating the local WIC program. We wanted to talk to central administrators at the state of Texas who are setting the policy for the WIC program for the entire state. We also recognize that WIC isn't just a clinic and home benefit. It also requires you to go to the grocery store and redeem the benefit for food types. So we went to grocery stores and tried to understand through frontline workers in the grocery store and through mom shopping habits what was going on. This is an example of us going to one home of one WIC mom, and what we're trying to do is code for different patterns. We're trying to understand what her experience with WIC is every step of the way. And what you're seeing in terms of all those sticky notes, that's us coding just one single interview. And this is a point that I really like to make, which is somewhere along the way, like when I was when we were launching CPAL, there was this movement to center lived experience of communities. And it was almost framed as at tension with centering data and evidence. And the point that I want to make is that lived experience is just data that hasn't been coded yet. Okay. So like there's what you ought to do is code it and then turn it into data that is usable. And so that's what we did. And we found out some really interesting insights. Like on average, it was taking mom 4 hours from the time she showed up at a WIC clinic until she was able to leave that clinic with her benefits. Right? When mom was in the waiting room of the WIC clinics, the floors of the WIC clinic were filthy, right? They were dirt. So mom's got an infant or a toddler. She doesn't want to be like hanging out with dirty floors, and she doesn't want to take healthcare advice from anybody that would want her infant and toddler on dirty floors. Mom told us about the nutritionist experience. So when you sign up for WIC benefits, you have to meet with a nutritionist. For whatever it's worth, people in my neighborhood pay like $70 an hour to meet with a nutritionist. But for mom, this was like a barrier to her getting her benefits, right? She was walking into the nutritionist's office, and what we were hearing was the nutritionist was sitting behind a giant desk, which means mom had effectively walked into the principal's office. And what mom was worried about was every time the nutritionist asked her a question, she was worried if she got it wrong, she might not get her benefits. So here's what we did. We went to Pleasant Grove, which was one of the neighborhoods where we saw the biggest opportunity to connect families with WIC benefits. And before we went there, we went on a $750 IKEA shopping spree. And we tried to revision and prototype solutions based off of what we heard from mom. We just tried some stuff, okay? So like one of my favorite prototypes, and it was awesome. We had this prototype that we called cleaning the floors. And what we did was we got on our hands and knees and we cleaned the floors, and we saw how that might change mom's experience and kids' experience. We tried to turn the clinics, the waiting spaces that originally felt like you were at the DMV, right, into something that was a little bit more collaborative, that felt a little bit more communal, that had the ability for interaction. We did this other prototype, which was called Take the Desk Out of the Nutritionist's Office. And instead, we replaced it with these kind of like weird yoga chairs that you can get from IKEA. And like, it fundamentally changed the experience that mom was having in the conversation and that the nutritionist was having. Okay, then we went to the grocery store, and what we did was we put GoPros on shopping carts and we watched mom shop. And one of the things that we kept on seeing over and over again was unlike traditional SNAP or food stamps, there's only very specific products that you can get with your WIC benefits. So repeatedly, what we would see was mom would go shopping, she'd end up at the checkout counter. They'd run the tab. Mom would end up with a balance of like $16, right? Because a couple of the products she got weren't actually WIC products. She didn't know which products weren't WIC eligible. The person behind the counter didn't know which products were WIC eligible. Now the line's being held up. Now the lady behind mom is groaning. Mom's embarrassed because she's already feeling a stigma about WIC. And she's wondering, why am I going to go every few months back to a clinic with dirty floors and wait 4 hours to be embarrassed over and over and over again? So same thing. We tried some stuff. What you'll see is we ran a prototype where we tried to create a pamphlet where we actually had pictures of the products that were WIC eligible. I didn't know this when we were starting the product, but it's a different set of products for a mom of a 2-year-old compared to a mom of a 4-year-old in terms of what's WIC eligible. So this kind of helped with the confusion. We found when we really like dove into the retail data that there were certain types of products that were causing that problem over and over again. So I don't know if y'all know this, but like all eggs look the same. Like all milk, it looks the same. And so we tried putting up these things that we called confusion cards on these very specific products to help mom figure out which carton of eggs or which carton of milk was actually WIC eligible versus not WIC eligible. Some of this stuff worked, some of it didn't. We've had really, really good conversations with big grocery chains that are adopting some of these ideas in their stores. But overall, we're focused on systems change. And then we did this thing that we still do sometimes to this day at CPAL, and it was like one of my favorite days in the first year of CPAL. We ran this workshop, and we call this workshop Moms and Bureaucrats. And the reason we call the workshop Moms and Bureaucrats is what we do is we get moms and we get bureaucrats, right? And we put them in the same room, and then we just kind of see what happens. And it's awesome. I mean, I'm telling y'all, it is awesome. So I will never forget, as long as I live, right, that the director of WIC shopping compliance for the state of Texas got up in front of this room of WIC moms and told those moms how they were supposed to shop at Walmart. Okay, just let that sink in for just a second. Okay, okay. Okay. Then this mom got up, okay, and gave like a 5-minute monologue on the difference between yellow cat milk and blue cat milk. And how come you only give me blue cat milk when my kid needs yellow cat milk? And like, I didn't really understand what was going on, but the shopping compliance director for the state of Texas for WIC, you could see this bulb go off. Like you could see the look on her face. You could see the moment it clicked when she realized maybe I shouldn't ask moms to rearrange their lives to fit my system. Maybe I should try to design my system to fit the way moms are living their lives. That's kind of what we're looking for and what we believe can be an unlock to more people getting their benefits. And we're a results-oriented organization. So this is what we care about is charts like this. You can see we got involved and actually started doing this work in February of 2019. Okay. And just by putting a spotlight on customer experience, right? Like we just started to see culturally that everybody in all the WIC clinics were starting to care more and more about mom's experience. And you start to see that we were at this time losing participants at a pretty rapid rate, month after month after month. So we stopped losing participants. Word of mouth is starting to pick up that WIC is a better experience. And like as we're entering into 2020, we're no longer hemorrhaging customers in WIC. We're adding WIC benefits month after month after month, and we've held that up. It's one of the reasons I will tell you that I believe to my soul that one of the root causes of persistent poverty in this country comes down to poor customer service, and that is fixable. So here's where we're at. I mean, every year right now, we measure, we count every month how many families receive WIC benefits. And over the last 12 months, we've passed out 150,000 more WIC benefits than we did in our baseline year when we got started. Real families real help for kids, a real difference in their lives. Okay, let's do one more. Also back, so like right now we're going through this cool period where across the country, cities are seeing a reduction in violent crime by and large. Like of the top like 35 largest cities, more than 30 of them are seeing a reduction in violent crime. But that was not always the case. And in 2019, we were having a really significant spike in gun violence in Dallas, and CPAL got really serious about reducing gun violence throughout our city. And we got serious for a couple reasons. One, gun violence affects kids directly. It's the like firearms more than auto accidents is the leading cause of death for kids in this country at this point. Second, just exposure to violence. If you are living in a high violence neighborhood as a child, that is a trauma. That is a high stress environment. We have lots of research to suggest that that is an impediment that is hard to overcome over time. And then third is I have a lot of friends in this work that says, the best way to stop gun violence is to end poverty. The thing is, I do this for a living. Ending poverty is really hard. Okay. And what I want you to understand is that the order of operation is we have a lot of criminology that tells us how to like stop gun violence. And if we stop gun violence, we'll have a better chance of dealing with root causes of poverty. And so we think that that's the order of operation. Like it's really hard to bring jobs to a neighborhood when bullets are flying. It's really hard to ask kids to focus on their homework when they're worried about walking to and from school. So that's why we get focused on this issue. And whenever we get focused on an issue, like we said, we're going to start with data and evidence. And what the evidence tells us is that within cities, gun violence is concentrated in a small set of disinvested neighborhoods. And within these neighborhoods, such violence is even more concentrated within a small set of micro-geographic locations, like particular streets. So here's what we did. We took Dallas, which, like Houston, is an enormous city. Okay, so Dallas is 385 square miles, right? And then we overlaid a grid on top of it, and we split Dallas up into 110,000 individual cells. Okay, and then we overlaid historic gun violence data, and we looked for a cut point in the data, and we found one. So we're going to look at how many of these 110,000 individual cells have one homicide that has occurred over the past 5 years and also had 3 incidents of gun violence within the past year. It needs to meet both of those criteria. That takes us from 110,000 down to 40. Okay. The combined surface area of these 40 cells is 0.15 square miles or 0.03% of the overall surface area of the city of Dallas. Now we look back over the last 5 years, and in that 0.03% of the surface area of Dallas, over 10% of all homicides in our city occurred over a 5-year period. So if you go to any mayor or any police chief anywhere in the country and you say, can you guarantee me that you're going to see a 10% reduction in homicides next year? They're probably going to say, well, we can't guarantee that. There's a lot of factors that go into it and it's complicated, and they'd be right. But if you go to those same mayor and that same police chief and say, can you stop homicides in 0.03% of your city? They'd probably say, yeah, I think we can do that. And those things are synonyms, right? And this is a pattern that holds in every single city it's ever been studied. So we did this other thing just for kicks, which is we built a 0.25 square mile border around each of the 40 cells. So this is an area that is more consistent with the Raj Shetty's research on characteristics of neighborhood and how far those characteristics impact economic mobility. Okay, so we built this 0.25 mile border around each of those 40 cells, and now we're capturing a quarter of all homicides in our city over a 5-year period. Okay, so when you have data that has that kind of leverage, we get really excited at CPAL because we think it's an opportunity to achieve scale literally by focusing on not scale, right? That's such an important concept. We want to look for opportunities where we can get scale by focusing on not scale. In other words, we have an opportunity to move a citywide outcome by focusing on block level locations, and that's exactly what we decided to do. So what we did is we used a more advanced analytics technique that showed us where the highest risk cell in the entire city of Dallas was. So we went to Malcolm X and Marburg. And we brought this data to city officials and community organizations. And when they saw the grid, they realized that this was something that could be helpful to them. When you lay out data like this, it allows place to be an unfair advantage in how to optimize limited resources. And so they saw the opportunity for reducing violence by pushing resources into the neighborhood in these very specific locations. And within a year's time, the Dallas Morning News was able to report that in the Malcolm X and Marburg area of South Dallas, the city had installed its first set of lights to enhance public safety, cleaned up abandoned lots, and supported mutual aid efforts of community residents. And lo and behold, violence dropped by 23% in the area. But we weren't done because we were seeing, even though overall violence across the year was falling, we were hiding behind averages when it came to summertime. So summertime was still seeing these spikes in violence, and that's when kids were most vulnerable. So what we did is we went to this abandoned lot in the middle of the Malcolm X and Marburg cell. And I'll tell you, like, just like I would not have felt safe standing in this lot a few years ago. But we got with residents, and what we did is we transformed the lot into a community gathering space. Essentially, we threw a summer-long block party. And the reason we did that is what we have consistently found is that the presence of positivity actually creates the absence of negativity, right? And we looked across all of our efforts over a 2-year period, and then we measured the results, and we found that the Malcolm X and Marburg neighborhood had gone from the highest risk cell for violence in the entire city of Dallas down to the 463rd, right? But it gets better, okay? Because today what we have is a growing number of community-based organizations, a growing number of city departments, and also law enforcement all adopting gridding strategies. And we're addressing dozens of cells at any given time in Dallas, and that's driving the citywide outcomes. So what we're seeing is year after year after year after year, violent crime is dropping. But the most remarkable part of this is that at the same time violence is dropping, we're seeing arrests drop also across the city and in these specific locations where we have place-based approaches. That means less kids have their families split up due to incarceration and more opportunity stays in the neighborhood. So look, this is why I believe that data is so powerful in driving decisions and also driving outcomes in cities like Dallas and cities like Houston. And it's not just something that we evangelize in settings like this. We think it's important that data not just stay at the level of policymakers and senior management. We need to drive data down to the ground. It's important that we use analytics to empower our implementers and our operators and our doers. And this is something that we can do across all of the issues we work on. And it's something that we can do in every city in America. And here's the other thing. When data connects to the ground, you'll have more confidence that the outcomes you're seeing are genuinely helping our kids and not just playing games with spurious correlations and averages. So look, I am so excited that Houston is so serious about economic mobility right now. My hope is that you attack the issues from many angles, that you remember that investments in economic mobility are also investments in giving every kid a happy and healthy childhood, and that if you take that approach, you literally can't lose because happy and healthy kids is reason enough to invest in happy and healthy kids. So I know you're going to be intentional as you build plans, but I encourage you not to get stuck in perpetual planning. I encourage you to have a bias for action. Thanks.
Wow. Alan, thank you so very much for that incredible presentation. I had heard about the WIC case study. We've known each other for a while, but that really blew me away. I'm working really hard to contain my excitement. People who know me as an excitable person. I'm actually going to go straight to a question from listeners, and feel free to send in any others, folks who are still with us. Most of you guys still are. But this is the tough question. It's probably on everybody's mind, which is, Dallas is different than Houston. The leadership is different. The government players are different. So, when you don't have a mayor or a judge or anything like that that is moving mountains to bring key leaders together, how do you engage government leaders to disrupt the status quo, to be willing to do the hard work to change very bureaucratic kind of systems?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are two things. First, we didn't have the kind of economic mobility summit that you've just come off of. I mean, you've already got a lot of will building at the time. Um, Honestly, like, you need to empower folks to act on this with some kind of formal authority. So that can be a mayor, it could be a superintendent, it could be a foundation, it could be any number, it could be business leaders, it could come from a lot of different places. Um, the main thing that that initial group did, where Mayor Rawlings brought together those leaders of the public agencies, was it sent a signal to the middle of their organizations that CPAL was an organization worth interacting with. Okay.
Yeah.
But the truth is, most of the decision making that occurs in government happens in the middle of the organization. So systems, a lot of times people focus on how do I get to the elected official or the CEO, right? I want an audience with the highest senior executive, or you see a lot of community organizing on the ground. But systems are kind of like Christmas lights, right? A lot of stuff happens in the middle, and it's just like one Christmas light goes out, and like all of the other lights go out. And if you
Mhm.
can figure out where in the middle of a system you could plug that light back in, you can actually have a really outsized effect at making a system and the resources work. So that's why I say like adopt a bureaucrat. I was this person, right? I was the assistant superintendent of early childhood education in the Dallas School District, which is a really cool way of saying I was a middle manager in the Dallas School District, right? And in that role, like at 30 years old, I had rulemaking control over $200 million and and the rules that were going to shape experiences for kids in pre-K through second grade, right? And very rarely did I need to go to the superintendent for permission because he didn't have time. And
Right.
very rarely did I need to go to the school board. But when I did need to go to the school board, it was very often because I wanted a little bit of analytics support to help me make better decisions.
Yeah.
And if I was going to spend, $30,000 on analytics, then I needed to go through a procurement process that was more political than trying to raise the debt ceiling. Right. And so, having philanthropy, having risk capital really help make sure that folks in the middle are empowered with good analytics that can help them make decisions and defend those decisions. It's
Mhm.
incredibly, incredibly powerful when it's not accountability, but it is data to help, not data to convince.
Yeah. I guess speak to a little bit, because there's a second part of this question about just like style, like how to avoid the defensive response and or how to navigate that, or do you just focus on the coalition, the willing, like just
Yeah.
like the approach to working with people who might not want
Yeah.
to change things or have a hard time kind of getting on board.
Well, we should just acknowledge that collaboration is really hard. Like really, really hard. Like it sounds so nice, like collaboration, and I mean, you could do that 5 years ago if you got a big room full of nonprofits and government and business leaders and say, hey, do we have an opportunity to do a better job collaborating? Like every hand would go up. Like, do you think we ought to focus on collaboration? Like everyone would be into it. And if you do that today, same thing. It's really hard, right? In the
Mhm.
private sector, when two companies want to like create value by collaborating, we call it a merger and
A
acquisition.
merger
Right.
acquisition.
And
Yeah.
we pay like lawyers millions of dollars to help us structure the collaboration, and it doesn't always feel great. And so I think it's important to say that. For us, we like to start with small teams. So sometimes there is like a bias for the big summit. Okay, there is a bias for like, how do we get everyone in the room all together? How do we pass out big sheets of paper and sticky dots and we're going to vote on it? For
Mhm.
us, we try to find a narrow problem, break that problem into very small pieces, just like we said. And then
Mhm.
how do we invite just a small group of folks together to get started so that everybody knows that they got a role to play and do that over and over and over again. Our version of collective impact isn't trying to get every organization in town to agree to only three strategies. Our version of collective impact is how do we like create the conditions where 1,000 adaptive flowers can bloom and we take advantage of a network effect throughout a Houston or a Dallas.
Yeah, that's great. There's a specific question just clarifying the gridding strategy and the parameters you use to divide Dallas into the 10,000 cells. But I also want to couple this with just like the use of data analytics, but how you all are thinking about geography and place as a part of CPAL's strategy. I mean, you touched on it, but anything else you want to add there as you clarify the gridding strategy question?
So when we started with the grading strategy, we were going to very granular locations. So we were going to 300 foot by 300 foot cells. And one of the cool things about public safety data is it's geocoded, it's real time, so you can get really, really precise. Not all data comes in that shape. Here's what I'd say more broad. Like now, we've actually expanded the grid cell because we're overlapping different types of issues together. And so what we're using are grid cells with half-mile radiuses. And the reason we're doing that is because of Raj Shetty's evidence, and also because of kids' experiences. So kids tend to experience neighborhoods not only in a 300 foot by 300 foot area, their neighborhood experience, they walk to parks, they're going to go to the store, they're going to go to school. So it's a little bit wider area. But also, Shetty's research is like very, very clear that there's a strong causal correlation between the place kids grow up and their chances for economic mobility. But that place is a granular grain size. So it's a 0.6 mile radius around a kid. That's where the characteristics matter. So we're doing things like right now, reshaping the kind of data that you're getting from different databases. So we're using all sorts of statistical techniques to do things like this, where we're taking all the poverty data in the country, and we're reshaping it into uh, half-mile radius cells, right? And so when you dig deeper, this is 1.7 million different grid cells across the country, so that we can understand where things like concentrated poverty are. So if I go to my hometown in Dallas, right? What I'm seeing is that in just 4.5% of the surface area of residential Dallas, so where people are actually
Right,
living,
right.
there are 17 precise locations where 20,000 kids are trapped in concentrated poverty. I believe this can be an unfair advantage for how we direct our resources. But if all you have as somebody that is in control of resources is zip code level data, then you're going to spread out your resources like peanut butter, and you might miss where the concentrated poverty is and where kids need those resources the most.
Yeah. That's really great. Thanks. And really cool tool. Let me know when it's live or if it is, I need to get the link.
Yeah, well,
Um,
we'll build it for you.
okay. Um, okay, there are a few more coming in. So talk a little bit about the difference between criminal justice big bet and safety or public safety big bet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And you know, some of it's just definitional difference. I mean, you could merge them, but look, when we're thinking about safety, I am thinking very much about exposure to violence for kids in that body of research. When I am thinking criminal justice, what I am thinking about is families being separated because a parent is dealing with jailing or incarceration of some kind. So, what we say is that when a parent goes to jail, kids are the hidden victims, and so that's really the distinction. But you could think of it as one system as well.
got it. Um, Here's a question that we probably may should have addressed at the top, but just define economic mobility really simply. I mean, we've worked through this and sort of economic mobility and the target population really simply. And we've worked through this and kind of landed on improving the economic well-being for people across a lifetime and across generations. So like a
Yeah.
two-generational approach, but you are clearly landing on child poverty. So just speak a little bit about how you simply define it for people who are trying to wrap their heads around it.
Yeah, so look, I look at child poverty as a proxy. Okay, it's an imperfect metric. Like we should think about the limitations of the data we use. But economic mobility is what we're really after. And when we think about that, what we're thinking about is if I split all the families in the country into quintiles in terms of their socioeconomics, right? I want kids that are in the bottom two quintiles to be able to, by the time they're adults, have actually moved up in the ranks in terms of the quintiles. I want kids that are growing up in poverty today to one day be parents of kids that are not in poverty.
Right, right, great. Have you solved for, I guess, is child poverty sort of the best real time like proxy because of the time horizon related to that vision?
I think it's good and easy to understand as a singular metric. Okay, but it's more
Yeah.
of a communication tool and a landmark to let us know that certain things are going in the right direction. I will tell you that it is very intoxicating to try to do these big collective impact efforts and have a North Star goal and every year report out and try to treat it like an evaluation of whether, but
Mhm.
that's not really an earnest way to look at the data. Child poverty in Dallas has been decreasing. So we've gone from 1 in 3 kids in poverty to 1 in 5. And by the way, it's been decreasing in Houston also over the period that we've been around. But that's not necessarily because we are achieving upward mobility, right? Part of this issue is we're on the clock. Are we going to deal with poverty by lifting families up or by pricing families out of our big cities?
Yeah.
And I can talk to you at length as to why this is not a zero-sum issue and why it's actually to the benefit of affluent Dallas and affluent Houston to also care about this issue from a perspective of self-interest. Some
Mhm.
other time we can go through all of those numbers and those economics. But it is, but also just as a matter of the social contract, like Houston and Dallas ought to be a place where a family can raise a kid.
Yeah.
That's kind of the goal here. I do think we're in an interesting moment where affordability is an issue for a much broader segment of America
Mhm.
and our
Mhm.
communities. And what that means is that there's a great opportunity to create alliance because the things that matter in fighting poverty matter in just the general affordability discussion. So
Right.
that you can frame this as a prosperity discussion as well, and you'd be right to do that.
Yeah. Great. Okay, I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question, real quick. So just speak to immigrant participation rates in WIC and any kind of perspective on whether that population was a part of that whole effort. Yeah.
So the reason we chose the neighborhood that we did, that we began working in, was one, we saw a very high opportunity to connect those eligible for WIC but not participating, but also because it was a very high non-English speaking community. And at that time, there was a lot of concern over public charge. So there was a lot of worry about connecting to government that, will I end up on a list? And, so,
Right.
and right. And
Which is
obviously
happening.
that continues to be a major concern to work through. And, I don't have silver bullet answers to this, but what I'd sort of suggest is one of the great ways to work on big systems change is to actually get on the ground and like work in one location. So start with a resident and work backwards into the
Mhm.
system, kind of like a secret shopper like
Mhm.
approach that
Mhm.
retail would take, and sort of understand what is it that is getting in the way. And if what's getting in the way is I don't feel safe walking into the WIC clinic, then that becomes one of the lines on your issues list. And you find somebody in Houston that wants to dedicate themselves to that problem statement. If you find like, hey, you know what? I don't have 4 hours to spend here because I'm working 2 jobs and the WIC clinic's only open these hours. Well, now we got to work on how do we get this down from 4 hours to 30 minutes. And let me go find a group of folks that's going to help work on that problem statement. So keep
Yeah.
splitting this up into small pieces and go find
Right.
people that want to dedicate themselves to the small problem statements.
Great. Yeah, I love the mantra. Like what was it like scale, advance, small scale. What's the thing? Like I need
Yeah,
to put it
like
on my wall. I'm gonna put it on my wall. I'm gonna start repeating it because the way
yeah.
I've been saying it hasn't worked.
Look, we really believe strongly that one of the best ways to achieve scale is focus on not scale. And
Yeah,
again,
I love
talk
that.
through it. Look, before I leave, I just want to say like how impressed we are, and how grateful we are for work that is already happening in Houston. Like we have incredible partners in the Houston area. An enormous amount of our housing work has been inspired by stuff that is happening in your community, and I think it's a really, really good opportunity that no one will see coming if we figure out how to collaborate across cities in Texas.
Yeah.
It's going to
Yeah, it'd be
surprise
great.
everybody.
It'd be
Yeah.
great. Okay, we are gonna try to squeeze in our little Mentimeter in rapid form. So I'm gonna share screen, get out your phones, and we want to hear your thoughts, your reactions to the conversation. We'll see how many folks we get. We did set a minimum of 20. So like if we don't get 20, oh, it's happening. I think we'll get there. I think it's gonna be good. Um, 12, great. 14, 15, 16, excellent. Everyone, thank you so much. We'll give you a minute to all get on. We should have picked a song to play or something. Um, this is great. Thank you all. I'll watch to see when we slow down. 30, 32. All right. Okay, still coming. Okay, I'm gonna move forward, and maybe Chelsea could put in the chat or someplace the code in case people need it. Okay. So before today, how familiar were you with CPAL? We've got some very familiar. We got some unfamiliar. Great. That means it worked. Yes, it served purpose. Excellent. That's so great. Awesome. Good. Some having trouble responding. Okay. What word or phrase best captures the core strength of this model? So everyone loves a word cloud. Think about it in a word or two words if you must, but this will be a word cloud that we create together. So one word or short phrase that best captures the core strength of this approach. We have data, action, not scale. Yeah, that's my favorite. Scale and not scale. Collaboration, data-driven, intentional, bias for action, strategic, human-centered, empathy, journey map. Love my human-centered design friends on the webinar here. It's great. If Houston were to learn from, adapt one core piece of CPAL's work in the next 12 months, what should it be and why? So this is like a little text box. So you have, a sentence or two to write in. So this is a little tougher, but data and research coordination entity, common framework for economic mobility. Yeah, your big bet kind of framework. Hone in on specific communities. Hire Alan Cohen. Maybe we should do that. We do have some great people here in Houston too, doing similar work, but yeah, taking action from strategic plans, bringing moms and bureaucrats to the table. That was really great. Action from government to bring dollars into Houston. True collaboration between multiple entities that can agree on one vision and mission. Core areas with mini teams and specific micro communities. Public sector leverage, smaller mapping, bias towards action. Make sure you have the right players at the table. Some smaller orgs are very impactful. Discrete problem focus. WIC example blew me away. Expanding efforts to Harris County maps. prioritizing lived experience. Yeah. Yeah, I often say that too, which is, yeah, lived experience is just qualitative data you got to make manageable and work with. All right. Do you know of a program, an organization, an initiative that is doing some similar work, has similar elements of what CPAL talked about? We, are a big believer in building on strengths and assets and leveraging those. So if yes, name, location, or like brief description, just basics, if anything comes to mind, or yeah, maybe not. Connective and Benefits Hub. That was going to be mine. Absolutely. Big users of human-centered design and data, and Unlock My Benefits is going really, really well. Women Resource Center, Spring Branch Family Development Center focused on collaboration, education, recreation, health, all in one place. Fort Bend Link, yeah, that's George Foundation. And Connective was also a huge part of that. Human-centered design process with a bunch of organizations. Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, Early Learning Quality Networks. I think we're a little over time. So, but feel free to think on this and add them in because we want to know. As a result of today's session, what are you most likely to do next? Further research, share what I learned with someone, connect with the presenting organization, explore whether my organization could do something like this, propose a pilot, a new initiative. Awesome. Great. When a webinar done right happens, it just is good, right? It's a good thing in the world. So I so appreciate all of you all staying on and joining us. Tell your friends it was a great webinar. We'll have it recorded. We'll share it with you all. It'll be posted and accessible. So thank you, Alan, for your time. Thank you, Chelsea. And Chelsea, we have two Chelseas for all the organizing. This was an incredible session. In our follow-up email, we'll plug our next webinar with Leading on Opportunity. They're based in Charlotte. They've been around 10 years, and they kind of did a different approach, and they're also sunsetting. So we'll talk about, the full arc of their kind of learning journey and hard lessons learned. So another great conversation. So we're doing these monthly. They're all going to be great. Probably not as great as Alan's, but it will be all good. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.